Hey, and welcome. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. The Ben Shapiro Show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. You have a right to privacy. Defend your rights at expressvpn.com/Ben. Well, we begin at this hour with the continuing controversy over Texas being completely frozen over. If there's one thing that we should have learned from what just happened in Texas, there are a few things. One, you got to harden your electrical grid. You got to make sure that you have the warming capacity necessary. You got to build more nuclear power plants. If there's one thing that we know for sure, though, it is that more windmills would not have helped. More windmills would have been a very bad idea in Texas. In fact, here is a chart. This is from Alex Epstein. Alex Epstein put out this chart about solar energy and wind energy and how they performed in Texas in the middle of this freeze. Alex is the co-founder of Thoughtful.community, and he's author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Here is what the Texas electrical grid looked like. The red line is the amount of demand for electricity. The blue in this chart is the amount of wind-generated power. The yellow is the amount of solar-generated power. You will see on February 4th, there's a fair amount of wind and solar-generated power. And then as the storm hit, look what happened. Why, it's almost as though wind and solar generation completely failed. They were unreliable sources of energy. See, here's the thing. You can do gas production in the middle of freezing temperatures. It happens in Alaska and Norway all the time, as the media is fond of pointing out. You can do nuclear. One thing you cannot do, wind generation or solar generation, at least not in huge numbers. And yet, the media's takeaway is that solar is necessary. We need more solar and more wind. If your takeaway from freezing temperatures leading to an energy shortage in Texas is that we need more of the thing that failed the most during this thing, you're completely insane. It's nuts. And yet, these are amazing journalism experts. They're saying that what this means is that we need a Green New Deal. I mean, it's amazing. Like, when things are good for oil and gas, we need a Green New Deal because we don't want people using oil and gas. Then when things are bad for oil and gas, we need a Green New Deal. Almost as though all you give a crap about is building alternative sources of energy that are significantly too expensive. Epstein has a thread about this. He says, there's a lot of conflicting information about the Texas blackouts. Here's the bottom line. The root cause of the Texas blackouts is a national and state policy that has prioritized the adoption of unreliable wind and solar energy over reliable energy. For the last decade, plus, policy in Texas and the United States has been focused on mandating or subsidizing as much wind and solar as possible. Texas has bragged about being the biggest wind generator in the United States. The Texas focus on wind has come above all at the expense of coal, which has the resiliency advantage, along with nuclear, of being able to store large quantities of fuel on site. Gas mostly requires just-in-time delivery from pipelines. But they stopped developing coal, and they stopped developing nuclear, and they spent all of the money on wind and solar. And that is why you end up with energy shortages in places like Texas. Right now, Texas's plans include 0 new nuclear plants, 0 new coal plants, 9.4 gigawatts of wind, 11.9 gigawatts of solar, and only 5 gigawatts of gas. Those are bad plans. The media, by contrast, they're like, you know what? AOC. Let's talk to AOC about this. Here's Brianna Keeler from CNN saying that AOC's Green New Deal is the solution to this, which is the dumbest thing that anyone has said about this crisis thus far.
It's all the windmills' fault, Governor Greg Abbott says, not missing the chance to spin a yarn for political gain in the middle of a crisis. He blames renewable energy for the rolling power outages that have Texans seeking refuge in their cars as the temperatures in their homes drop into the 40s. But he's wrong. Experts say that it is a garden variety of reasons. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the architects of the climate legislation, responded, quote, "The infrastructure failures in Texas are quite literally what happens when you don't pursue a Green New Deal."
Well, I mean, if the former waitress says so, I guess that we're done here. I mean, if the bartender who has a degree in economics from Boston University and yet somehow thinks that the solution to this is more windmills, says so, I guess we should listen to her. If somebody knows energy policy, it's the lady who thinks that we should build high-speed rail, get rid of planes, and retrofit every building in the United States. And also stop eating meat. Obviously she's the expert. I'm so glad that Brianna Keeler of CNN could really put her finger on the pulse of the nation. Texas freezes, go to AOC at her bistro in Brooklyn. Okay, meanwhile, the media are going nuts today because Ted Cruz apparently is in Cancun. Now, I will admit that this is bad optics. Of course it's bad optics. Whenever there's a crisis, if you are seen to be having any sort of good time because our politics are incredibly stupid, this means that you're responsible for the crisis. Everything in politics is performative right now. Members of Congress don't do anything for a living. All they do is gather once every so often to spend too much of your money. And so everything becomes performative. Right? The reason that AOC is a star is because she goes to immigration facilities and takes photo shoots outside immigration facilities being emotional in response to what is going on apparently, inside the immigration facilities. The more performative you are in politics, the better you do these days. That is just the reality of the situation. So I get that it's bad optics for Ted Cruz to take his family on vacation to Cancun right now. It even sounds bad. But let's be real about this for just 1 second. This is one of the stupidest aspects of our politics. Like, what exactly? It's not a real-time crisis that Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, can do anything about. Because the senator from Texas is, in fact, in the United States Senate. He's a federal officer, right? He's a federal elected official. This is up to the mayor of Houston and, like, the governor of Texas and all the people who are state-level officials. And also, I just wonder, what is Ted Cruz, like, did they expect Ted to go there with, like, a blowtorch and start defrosting all of the pipelines? He can do what Beto O'Rourke does, and he can tweet out a bunch of links to people who are helping out. I'm sure Ted's already done that. But the notion that the gravest of all sins is that you took your family to a place that is not Texas in the middle of a bad situation in Texas. My favorite part of this is all the journalists in their heated apartments in New York who are tweeting angrily about all of this. I can't believe Ted Cruz would do something like this. Oh, yeah. I see you there on the ground handing out food. Really, well done there. Really, really well done. Okay, meanwhile, I'd be remiss if I did not get to what is easily the stupidest story of the day. This is the stupidest story of the day. This is from the wellness section at the Washington Post. So, you may recall that there is a woman who is stupid enough to put a bunch of Gorilla Glue in her hair. This is very stupid. Gorilla Glue is glue, as indicated by the name, Gorilla Glue. Right? It is super glue, essentially. Why would you put that in your hair? Unless you're a dum-dum. Okay, the lady's a dum-dum. As evidenced by the fact that she put glue in her hair. I don't even have to go further than that. You take Gorilla Glue and you spray it in your hair. You ain't getting into Phi Beta Kappa. Hey, how does the Washington Post spin this? Well, it turns out that the lady was black. I had no idea, but apparently she is. This means that the reason she sprayed Gorilla Glue in her hair, I'm not kidding you, the reason she sprayed Gorilla Glue in her hair is because of systemic racism, according to the Washington Post. Which is weird, because I have not seen a massive spate of black people spraying Gorilla Glue into their hair. Only this dumb lady. Like, this is not a systemic problem in the black community. People spray painting their hair with Gorilla Glue. Like, that's not a thing. The reason this lady was a headline is because she did something unbelievably stupid, and then it went viral online. And the Washington Post is like, yes, but have you considered the possibility that this is an outgrowth of 400 years of oppression? And no, I didn't consider that possibility because oppressed people generally don't spray Gorilla Glue in their hair. Weird. But here is the Washington Post. Our media. They don't have a narrative, guys. They are perfectly objective. Remember, this is not in the op-ed section. Letitia Beecham writing. Tessica Brown no longer feels like she has red ants crawling around her scalp. Brown, 40, nicknamed Gorilla Glue Girl, captured the internet's attention with her forever ponytail after she used Gorilla Glue spray, a very strong adhesive for heavy-duty projects, to create possibly the slickest of side parts and swooped edges known to womankind. The embarrassing ordeal has left Brown with some missing baby hairs, bald patches that are expected to recover, and a much shorter hairstyle that's nowhere near the amount of inches she had with her month-long braid. Over the next 6 weeks, Brown can't put much else on her scalp except for a concoction created by a Beverly Hills, California-based plastic surgeon who removed the glue from her hair. At this point, I'm scared to put a relaxer on my hair, she told the Washington Post in an interview, adding she has decided to go natural and embrace the naturalness of her hair. Brown's saga, says the Washington Post, which first went viral on social media and then became national news, appealed to some black people who still shudder at the thought of a relaxer or the sizzling pain of a hot comb that got too close to skin, memories that have led many black women to sport their own kinks and curls. Plenty of people ridiculed and got their belly laughs at Brown's misfortune, but there was a sense of community among others, especially black people who sought to shield her from being a spectacle of idiocy. The extreme she went to for zero flyaways is very unusual, but the desired outcome is as old as black people's time in a country that often mocked how they look. Experts say. What now? Huh? So you want to talk about the history of people discriminating on the basis of race, and you want to talk about the discriminatory attitude towards particular types of hair that have existed in American society? Perfectly fine. If you want to say that this lady is like a perfect example of discrimination on the basis of hair because she used Gorilla Glue in her hair, again, can't we just say that some people are idiots and do stupid things? Is that possible? Can we do that? Is that ever a possibility? Also, note to the world, there are a lot of very prominent black Americans who are not doing any of these things anymore, which is great. People should be able to wear their hair however they feel like wearing their hair. That's fine. Why you would lump in people who want to wear their hair a certain way with Gorilla Glue lady, or suggest that American society is to blame for a dummy putting Gorilla Glue on her head it's not beyond me. I know exactly why they're doing it, right? It's every problem in American society is attributable to systems of power. Those systems of power are rooted in innate white supremacy. So if a dumb lady puts Gorilla Glue on her head, and she happens to be a black lady who put Gorilla Glue on her head, it has to be that this is a legacy of America's hierarchies of power coming all the way back to 1619. Think piece in the New York Times. This one, at least, is in the Washington Post. The mother of 5 said she was familiar with Gorilla Glue before her very unfortunate mistake, often using it around her Louisiana home for tasks, such as setting up Christmas decorations. Okay, first of all, that right there would be a good indicator that she is a complete moron. It's not as though she went to the store and she's like, oh, it says Gorilla Glue and it's a spray, so maybe it's a hairspray. She used it around her home to glue things, and then she put it in her hair. Okay, this is the equivalent of the lady who gave fish tank cleaner to her husband because she thought that fish tank cleaner was hydroxychloroquine. People doing dumb things are usually not outgrowths of systemic racism. They're just people doing dumb things. When she ran out of her favorite got-to-be glued hairspray, she reached for the Gorilla Spray adhesive to save on time before leaving her home. She figured she could just spray it on her hair and wash it out once she got home that day. I don't know why you would figure that unless you're a dummy, unless you're stupid. Days turned into a week before she shamefully admitted to her mother what she had done. That week became a month before she went to social media to seek help, she said. I'm sorry, the fact that she was like sitting around for a month and she's like, my hair is glued. Like, after 2 days, you weren't like, this is kind of a problem? She said, the only reason why I took it to social media is because we ran out of things to do. I figured somebody out there would be able to tell me what to do. I never thought my little girl would say, Ma, your video has 1 million views. She had to console one of her young daughters who said she endured taunts from other children making fun of her mother. Now, don't make fun of the kids. I mean, it's not the kids' fault that mommy is not particularly bright. Brown had to keep under control the angst of possibly never running her fingers through her hair again for the sake of the children who came to her daycare, Tessa's Little Angels Learning Academy. Neil Lester said he initially thought Brown's problem was a prank, but as he continued to follow this story, he said it reminded him of all the ways Black Americans have used unusual hair products to manipulate or style their hair. I thought of Malcolm X and his experience with the conch, said Foundation Professor of English and founding director of Project of Humanities at Arizona State University, referring to the hair straightener made of lye, eggs, and potatoes used by many Black people in the earlier and middle part of the 20th century. That stringing started with enslaved people using axle wheel grease and dirty dishwasher with oil. Enslaved men used axle wheel grease as a means to dye their hair or temporarily straighten it. Women would use butter, fat from bacon, or grease from geese to care for their hair, according to Hair Story, Untangling the Roots of Black Hair in America. Yeah. Well, see, she's not enslaved. She was not attempting to, according to her, abide by white standards of beauty or anything. There's nothing in here that says that that's what she was attempting to do. She said she just liked her hair that way. But it's still systemic racism. So, as always, the root of every problem in life is systemic American racism. The only solution, hire Ibram X. Kendi for $20,000 to tell you that you're a white supremacist. Otherwise, this sort of evil will run rampant across society. People gorilla gluing their hair every single day as a direct outgrowth of the legacy of racism in the United States. Oh, Washington Post. I can't imagine why people mistrust our institutional media. They're so good at what they do. Alrighty, coming up, big controversy with Facebook banning news in Australia. Why are they doing that? Well, here's the thing. Facebook is not completely wrong. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. So there's this fascinating sort of social media war that is now going on in Australia, of all places. Facebook has now blocked news in Australia, diverging with Google on their proposed law. So the way that this is being treated in the media is Facebook bad, Australia good. That's really not what's going on here. So here is the story according to the New York Times. For months, Facebook and Google have been locked in a stare-down with news publishers and lawmakers in Australia. At the heart of the fight is whether tech giants should pay news organizations for the news articles that are shared on their networks. Under a proposed law from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, both Google and Facebook would be required to negotiate with media publishers and compensate them for the content that appears on their site. This is a very stupid law. Truthfully, it's a really dumb law. So I run a media organization. Facebook should not have to pay us for people distributing our links on Facebook. In fact, people distributing our links on Facebook is one of the things that helps make us money, because when we get more traffic, we get more advertising revenue, we get more subscriptions, and we monetize that. And social media is a platform for news organizations to be able to disseminate their information. Facebook doesn't have to pay these organizations in order to platform them. It's very silly. And the fact that they're seeking legislation in order to get involved is incredibly silly. By the way, it turns out that News Corp was actually able to develop a deal whereby Google was paying for their news. And News Corp understood that it had the whip hand when it came to the news business in some ways, and that Google News needed them, so they actually did negotiate a deal with Rupert Murdoch and his news organizations. But Facebook isn't as reliant on that, because most people don't actually use Facebook chiefly for news, right? News is just part of what they do every day. So Facebook and Google have fought hard to prevent the Australian law, expected to pass this week or next, from forcing their hands. On Wednesday, the two companies sharply diverged on how to head off that regulatory future. Google began the day by unveiling a 3-year global agreement with Rupert Murdoch's News Corp to pay for the publisher's news content, one of several such deals it has announced recently, where it appears to be effectively capitulating to publishers' demands. Hours later, Facebook took the opposite tack and said it would restrict people and publishers from sharing or viewing news links in Australia, in a move that was effective immediately. So Facebook said this: listen, you're going to try and force us to pay Daily Wire or Fox News or CNN for people to share their links? Well, no. So people just won't be able to distribute their links. It's not that Facebook is attempting to block the news, guys. It's that Facebook is attempting to stop the government from forcing Facebook to pay these news organizations for the dissemination of their information. Some of us are perfectly happy to have Facebook distribute our information for free. Some of us are perfectly happy with that arrangement. Australia is trying to pass a law mandating it. Now, what does that actually do in effect? What it effectively does is it means that the biggest news corporations get the upper hand on smaller news organizations, because Facebook has very little interest in paying a small outlet for its news, but they have a very big interest in negotiating a deal with, say, Rupert Murdoch. Google is not going to be paying a small outlet so that its headlines can be distributed, but they will be paying Rupert Murdoch, presumably, a large sum of money in order to distribute his information. So this law actually ends by creating more of a monopoly in the news space for the already big players. So here's the deal. The Australian government happens to be wrong here. Facebook's response is not pretty, but if you're running Facebook, you'd probably do the same thing. If you're running Facebook, you would probably say, listen, I'm not going to pay these news outlets for the great pleasure of distributing their information. They don't make us enough money, so forget it. In conciliatory language toward publishers, Don Harrison, president for global partnerships at Google, said that the company had invested to help news organizations over the years and that it hoped to announce even more partnerships soon. By the way, there's something deeply Orwellian about corporations partnering with news organizations and then funding them. Right? That is not great. If you want independent journalism, presumably you want people to have equal access to the news. If the law forces, again, corporations to pay these outlets for their news, only the outlets that have a big readership already are going to get paid. Facebook struck a distinctively different tone. William Easton said the proposed law fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between our platform and publishers who use it to share content. This is correct. So the situation in Australia is being used as sort of a cudgel against Facebook, but the reality is that Google is the one that is capitulating to an authoritarian move by the government here. Facebook is actually not. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to be joined by Alex Epstein, an energy expert, to talk about what's happening in Texas. Plus, I'm going to jump into the mailbag. We haven't answered your questions all week long. We're going to rectify that immediately. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. We're going to jump into the mailbag in just one moment. First, got a note. I once suggested that the Obama administration had an anti-Semitism problem. That's because they have an anti-Semitism problem. Ben Rhodes was one of the chief advisors to Barack Obama. He just did an interview with the horrifically anti-Israel, ridiculous human being Peter Beinart, who I once suggested was a sympathizer with Hamas, because he is. And Peter Beinart did this interview with Ben Rhodes, who served in Obama's White House from 2009 to 2017. Here is some of the stuff that Rhodes said. Quote, "You have this incredibly organized pro-Israel community that is very accustomed to having access in the White House and Congress at the State Department. It's kind of taken as granted, as given, that that's going to be the way things are done. And he said that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, knew that not only could he kind of gin up the right-wing pro-Likud media in the United States, which is pretty vast, he knew that if he needled Obama, that would create a week-long political story. He says, I wish the right would just say, we don't believe there should be a Palestinian state. We believe in the concept of a greater Israel. We feel sorry for the Palestinians, but they're just going to have to deal with it. That's the position of the Israeli government. Frankly, that's the position of the Republican Party. And then he says, maybe the view is, this is what he says about Netanyahu, maybe the view is, Jews have been screwed throughout history by a corrupt, cruel world. And so you know what? We just have to be corrupt and cruel ourselves. That's the only way to survive in this world. So it's the pro-Likud media in the United States and Jews who are vindictive because Jews have been victimized throughout history, so they're trying to victimize others. So Ben Rose just hates Jews. I mean, that's pretty obvious what's going on here, right? I mean, like, the guy's just terrible. He's just terrible. This is just Ilhan Omar stuff. It is amazing to me that this person served at the top of an administration and is considered a worthwhile expositor on these issues. It's really nuts. I mean, that is like pure Ilhan Omar anti-Semitism. So really, really strong stuff right there. Whew. Kind of amazing. Kind of amazing. So that's exciting stuff. All right, let's check the mailbag. Alrighty. Daniel says, what is the difference between nationalism and patriotism? Thank you for all you do. So I think that the easy way of summing up this idea is that nationalism is the idea that your country is special because it is your country. Patriotism is the idea that your country is special because it holds certain particular ideals that make it special. So I think patriotism is generally good when the country is good. Nationalism is generally neutral. You can be a nationalist for a terrible country. You can be a North Korean nationalist or a Chinese nationalist. But to be an American patriot requires that you actually understand American ideals. So I believe in patriotism much more than I believe in sort of pure nationalism. Now, nationalism sometimes means something beyond that. It means the sort of heart allegiance that you have to the place where you were born. And that goes just beyond patriotism. It's sort of an emotional response to the place that you grew up in. And so on that level, nationalism can be a good thing. But again, it has to be linked with patriotism. Nationalism without patriotism is a mistake. And patriotism without nationalism is, I think, not quite deep enough, would be the answer here. Matt says, in just 2 months, we've had so many stories that need retelling to prove the hypocrisy and corruption of the left. It scares me that some of these important stories may lose steam. Which stories should conservatives focus on and make sure to keep in the forefront? Which do you think are okay to forget about? Thinking of the Cuomo cover-up, Robin Hood, the AOC, Ted Cruz tried to have me murdered stuff, Hunter Biden investigation, etc. Well, I think that you focus on the news stories that continue to be relevant. So the Hunter Biden thing is going to continue to be relevant. The Cuomo cover-up is going to continue to be relevant. The Democrats are going to keep January 6th first and foremost in their minds. But the overall narrative is what you really have to remember, which is that the media cannot be trusted on controversial issues. They just cannot. They do not tell you the truth. They lie about their own agenda. That doesn't mean they're always lying. It doesn't mean they're always unfactual. It does mean that it is absurd to claim that the media that has consistently gotten these sorts of stuff wrong and done so in perfectly predictable partisan fashion, right? These are not stories until the election. Then after the election, they become stories. You can't trust those folks. You got to verify. Always. Larry says, do you think the phenomenon of groupthink has an impact on presidential administrations? If so, what measures should future administrations put in place to mitigate this problem? Well, I think it is important to ensure that many people in your administration have differing points of view. I think it's good to have debate inside the room. Now, everybody still has to be loyal to the administration. Everybody at the end of the day has to say the president has made his call, and that call is what goes here. But it is good to have a wide variety of views in the room so that you can actually hash things out, argue them out, and see all sides of a particular issue. Even at the Daily Wire, we have a wide variation of views on a wide variety of political topics, and we try to have some discussion of how to broach those topics when they become controversial, for example. Andrew says, the legal argument I heard one of the House impeachment managers making was that impeachment is meant to remove or disqualify someone from office and not remove and disqualify from holding office. Based on this argument, what stops them from disqualifying someone before they take office, saying Ron DeSantis is too dangerous, so we must disqualify him from holding future positions. Thanks for all you do over at the Daily Wire. This is a good point. It is a good point. Theoretically, you could bring an impeachment charge against somebody based on pretty much anything, according to the House impeachment managers. Their better argument was he was impeached while he was in office. We can do a conviction while he's not in office. It would be very weird to impeach somebody after they were already out of office. But you're right, there is no limiting principle. They could theoretically preemptively impeach a politician they don't like and then convict him so as to prevent him from running for future office, according to their own argument. It's a good point. Adina says, Despite the recent chaos of the Israeli parliamentary system, the Knesset, many of my friends believe Israel generally runs in smoother fashion than the United States as a form of government. Would you be of the opinion Israel is strong internally because they have a parliamentary system, or because they live a community, charity, and volunteer-oriented society? It's the latter. And they have an existential threat on their borders. Everybody serves in the military. There's a common religious heritage, even for people who consider themselves secular. There's a common historical heritage. There is still a common culture. Right? All of the things that I talk about and how to destroy the America in 3 easy steps. Right? The things that you require in order to hold a country together, a common philosophy, a common culture, and a common history. Those things do exist in Israel. Increasingly in the United States, they do not. That's one of the reasons you're starting to see American politics fragment, but it's not because of the system. Israel's parliamentary system is extraordinarily unstable. It's why you've had 83 elections in the last 2 years. In 1 second, we'll get to more of your questions in the mailbag. First, let's talk about something rather awkward. Let's talk about erectile dysfunction. So, nobody wants to hear about that, and nobody wants to talk about that. But if you are suffering from ED, you need to go get it solved right now. With Roman, you can get a free online evaluation and ongoing care for ED, all from the comfort and privacy of your home. A healthcare professional will work with you to find the best treatment plan. If medication is appropriate, Roman will ship it to you with free 2-day shipping. The whole process is straightforward, simple, and discreet. Getting started is really easy. Just go to GetRoman.com/Ben, complete an online visit. Erectile dysfunction used to be tough to tackle. Now there is Roman. Complete an online visit today. Connect with a healthcare professional. Get it taken care of quickly and easily. Go to GetRoman.com/Ben today. If approved, you'll get $15 off your first order of ED treatment. That is GetRoman.com/Ben, GetRoman.com/Ben. A lot of people have medical problems and they just suffer with the medical problems for no apparent reason. If you got a medical problem, go get it solved, especially when the folks at Roman can help you do it quickly and easily. Once more, that is GetRoman.com/Ben today. And if you are approved, you get $15 off your first order of ED treatment. GetRoman.com/Ben. Maria says, I have a friend that constantly tells me he refuses to be religious. His arguments usually stem from the fact that religion is man-made and anyone who follows a specific religion is quote-unquote brainwashed. Do you have a good argument for those who refuse to see religion as divinely inspired or important for a society? Well, those are two different questions. Important for a society, it's very difficult to argue that religion is not important for a society. Because, let's face it, every society has a governing ideology that people buy into. And that ideology can either be secular religion or it can be religious religion. The Soviet Union had a secular religion. Stalin led the list. The Chinese Communist Party has a secular religion. It involves rituals like you can't have more than one child and we will forcibly sterilize people who dissent. Right? The human brain is built for belief in something higher. The question is, what is that something higher? As far as religion being important for a society, a belief in individual virtue, a belief that there is a God watching over you who wants you to act like a virtuous human being is a very good thing. Voltaire, no big fan of religion, once suggested that he wasn't personally religious, but he certainly hoped that his maid was so she wouldn't steal everything in his house. Right? That seems to be a fairly common viewpoint. As far as the argument for those who refuse to see religion as divinely inspired, the argument that I have made is that virtually all of the hallmarks of secular thought spring at root from a similar religious belief. They just don't want to acknowledge it. So folks on the secular left will say, yes, there is such a thing as morality. And we have the ability to suss it out. We have the ability to see that morality using our brains. And here's the question, why? Why? The brain is built for evolutionary fitness. The brain is not built for seeing right and wrong. And if it's just built for evolutionary fitness, what makes something right or wrong other than evolutionary fitness? This is a question I put to Sam Harris. I still don't think he had a very good answer to it. The reality is, if you think that you have the capacity to see truth, an objective truth that exists beyond simple evolutionary fitness, if you believe that the human brain reflects truths that exist outside of you, not just things that help you get along through life, but actual truths, then that truth comes from somewhere, and it comes from outside you. The concept of an existent truth that lives outside your brain immediately suggests the presence of something else. It also happens to be the case that Western civilization rooted in Judeo-Christianity has been the greatest boon to mankind ever on planet Earth, without a doubt. I talk about this in The Right Side of History at length. The balance between Athens, which is human reason, and Jerusalem, which is divinely inspired morality, that balance brought about the West. The West has brought about unending human prosperity. And freedom, by the way. Solomon says, any chance you could share your recipe for hash browns? Yes, there's a video that came out of me this week talking about my wife's favorite thing that I make, which is my hash browns. So here's the key. Okay, very, very easy recipe. First of all, butter, man. Butter is the greatest ingredient in human history. Butter in the pan. Cover the bottom of the pan with butter. Put a few more pats of butter in the pan. Take your hash browns. You can use frozen ones. They're fine. Frozen hash browns in the pan. You put a bunch of salt on those things, right? And then You cover the hash browns with a piece of aluminum foil on top, right? You don't leave them uncovered because that dries out the hash browns too much. You let them go for like 10 minutes, right? You let them go for a while because it takes a while to defrost the hash browns. Then you flip them over, cover them again. You let them go for another like 6 minutes. Keep your awareness that they don't get burned. Maybe add a little butter on the other side too. And now you have created the perfect hash brown. It is 1 million calories. It will clog your arteries and it tastes absolutely delicious. Kelly says, my husband and I decided to homeschool our kids starting last September. I'm currently teaching them about our government, trying to impress upon them the importance of the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and Bill of Rights. I'm having difficulty understanding the 9th and 10th Amendments. My sons are 9 and 7. If you have time, can you explain in layman's terms those two amendments? Okay, so here, the 9th Amendment, here's the text of the 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The 10th Amendment is the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution or prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or the people. Okay, so let's start with the 10th Amendment because it's easier. The 10th Amendment says that if a power has not been delegated to via the Constitution to the federal government, it does not belong to the federal government. Okay, this was an attempt to limit the power of the federal government to enumerated powers. We've completely overturned the 10th Amendment. Okay, the 10th Amendment is just a re-expression of the reality of the structural Constitution before you get to the Bill of Rights, which is only certain powers were given to the federal government. You don't get to simply make up new powers that the federal government has. And courts have decided the 10th Amendment means nothing and we're just going to destroy it. Okay, it's that simple. As far as the 9th Amendment, the 9th Amendment suggests that there are rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution and that the federal government should be very careful of disparaging. So, for example, you've seen courts, particularly in the early 20th century, talk about the right to contract. There's nothing specifically in the Constitution of the United States that creates a quote-unquote right to contract. But the idea here is that there are rights that exist outside of the Bill of Rights that are protected against the predations of government. The reason that this amendment was added is because there were a lot of critics of the Bill of Rights, and they said, here's the problem. You're naming all these rights, but in a way, you're basically saying outside of these specific rights, the government can do whatever it wants. The 9th Amendment was a catch-all. It was designed to say, no, there are a bunch of other rights that you are not allowed to invade. And if we forgot to specify them here, that doesn't mean they don't exist. And then the 10th Amendment was meant to guarantee that by saying, you stick to the powers we gave you guys. The 9th and 10th Amendments have been completely blown up by the federal government since, and the courts have basically turned them into non-entities. Okay, in just 1 second, we're going to be joined by energy expert Alex Epstein to talk about what exactly is going on in Texas. First, you unhappy with your smile? You don't have to be. Thousands of people have used Candid, the clear, comfortable, removable, practically invisible aligners to help straighten their teeth, and now they love their smile. Justin in Atlanta says, when I was younger, I used to have a gap in the front and on the side. I noticed people would always look in my mouth first, so I was looking for a fix. Candid ended up being the perfect company for me. You can't stop me from smiling now. There's no comparison. And Candid is here to help straighten your teeth as well, so you can fall in love with that smile too. Your treatment is prescribed and closely monitored remotely by a licensed orthodontist who's an expert in tooth movement. You'll have the same quality of care you'd get from an in-office orthodontist from the comfort and convenience of your own home. And while other companies use general dentists, Candid only works with orthodontists. With Candid, the same orthodontist who created your plan is with you from start to finish, so you're never going to have to worry how you're doing. It costs thousands of bucks less than traditional braces. Become your best you. Start straightening your teeth today. Right now, you can save $75 on Candid's starter kit. Go to candidco.com/Ben and use code Ben. That is candidco.com/Ben. Use code Ben. Take advantage of the limited time offer. Save $75 on that starter kit. candidco.com/Ben. Use code Ben. Alrighty, coming up, we're going to be joined by energy expert Alex Epstein to talk about what the hell is going on in Texas. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Welcome back. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. We're joined on the line by Alex Epstein. He's an energy expert who argues that human flourishing should be the guiding principle of energy and environmental progress, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and the creator of EnergyTalkingPoints.com, a source for well-referenced talking points on energy, environmental, and climate issues. You can follow him on Twitter at Alex Epstein. Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, great to be here.
So, Alex, let's talk about what the heck is going on in Texas. The media obviously have a very large stake in claiming that what is going on in Texas is the fault of, I guess, reliable sources of energy alone, that it's coal, it's natural gas, it's nuclear power. that really, apparently, what the world needs is more windmills. I'm not kidding. The Washington Post wrote an editorial saying that what just happened in Texas proves the need for a Green New Deal. I cannot imagine something stupider than that, given that the windmills completely failed in Texas. Can you explain what exactly happened in Texas? Because failure has many parents, but the solution is clearly not what they're talking about here.
Right. I think it's important to note what happened around the country, which is basically it got cold in a lot of places. In every single place it got cold, there was a common trend. Wind and solar went totally out to lunch. And it's not just that the wind turbines froze. That's a very minor thing. It's that the wind wasn't blowing. That's why I call wind and solar unreliables, because they're not there often when you need them the most. So what happened is that nuclear and fossil fuels, what I call the reliables, they were doing all the heavy lifting everywhere in the country. I've posted this on Twitter. You can look anywhere, the Northeast, New England, New York, Midwest, Southwest, everywhere. Fossil fuels are the atlas that's holding up our country. And that is also true in Texas. If you look at what happened in Texas, fossil fuels were dramatically ramping up. Wind had been dominant in Texas like a week before. And so natural gas was low. And then natural gas heroically ramped up to these enormous levels. That's the most flexible source of power. And then you see a crash. But you see the crash is a crash of natural gas mostly. But where were wind and solar? They were even more out to lunch. And so if you look at the chronology of this, it's not fully understood, but the root cause is very clear. America is having systemic problems with reliability. We know more than ever about how to generate reliable electricity, but we have less reliable electricity than ever, including where I live in California. And the reason is because policy today rewards unreliability and punishes reliability. That is the fundamental that's causing systemic problems.
It's pretty amazing to watch as the media spin this, because their spin has been, well, wind doesn't really comprise that much of Texas's energy in the first place. So if wind fails, then it's really only going to hurt them like a little. But if all of the other sources of energy fail, then it's going to hurt them a lot. Well, there's a counter side to that, which is you're asking the reliable sources of energy, as you put it, to pick up all the slack for the failure of wind and solar. And you haven't built anything new in those areas, particularly when it comes to coal plants, for a very, very long time, but nuclear plants as well.
Yeah, you've shut down coal plants. And I posted on Twitter the statistics. It's super scary if you look at what's actually supporting our electricity and what's not. Texas is much better in terms of its plans than the rest of the country. It's planning 0 new nuclear plants, 0 new coal plants. I think it's planning to shut them down. 9.4 gigawatts of wind. So that's a basically 1/3 increase in wind that did nothing. Then 12 gigawatts of solar, which is a huge increase in solar that did nothing. And then 5 gigawatts of gas, which is basically just to handle the ups and downs of the wind and solar. So we see Texas going in a certain direction that is more unreliables, less reliables. And one thing people don't know is the more you focus on unreliables, the more the reliables have to suffer because they have to go up and down to accommodate the unreliables. Also, you lose focus on maintenance and resilience. That's what happened in California. We didn't maintain our power lines because we were already paying so much for green energy. Same thing in Texas. The more you pay exorbitantly for green energy, the less focus and resources you have for reliability.
So in the end, who's to blame for all of this and how does it get solved? Because it seems like the push from Republicans is, we have to redirect our energies from these unreliable sources of energy back to reliable sources of energy. But the media are really propagandizing hard on behalf of wind and solar. It really is pretty impressive. As soon as you say that wind and solar failed here, they immediately come back at, well, wind and solar weren't that big a deal in the first place. So why are you focusing on wind and solar? Really, this is the fault of natural gas and coal. I mean, Brianna Keilar at CNN was quoting Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez suggesting that this is why we need a Green New Deal, which is kind of insane. It's like going up to somebody who just had a heart attack and saying, here's why you need some more butter.
Yeah, so I think we need to make a distinction. It's not that wind and solar failed, specifically not that the wind turbines froze, and that's the main problem. It's that policies designed to promote wind and solar failed because they made us overly dependent on these unreliable sources and they took resources and focus away from reliable resources. So what we need is systemic change in terms of policy, and we need to stop all the policies that punish reliability and reward unreliability. So one of these is the wind production tax credit, which Republicans and Democrats insist on passing decade after decade. That gives a premium price to unreliable wind and unreliable solar. Also, grids around the country, Texas and nationally, they have very unfair payment policies that reward unreliability because they hold these totally fake competitions every 5 minutes, and they give money to the people who offer the lowest price on a 5-minute interval. What needs to happen is you need to make decisions not by these 5-minute intervals, but by long-term system costs. And when you make decisions by long-term system costs, that's when you get nuclear, that's when you get gas, that's when you get coal, and you wouldn't have all these unreliables. That's the real reform that's necessary.
That's Alex Epstein, energy expert. His book is The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. He's the creator of EnergyTalkingPoints.com. He's an excellent source on this sort of stuff for sure. Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben.
Alrighty, well, we will be back here tomorrow with much, much more controversy engulfing Senator Ted Cruz, because Senator Cruz apparently headed down to Cancun in the middle of this Texas cold snap. Apparently, this is something morally egregious. Now, I can agree that it's bad optics, that when politicians do this sort of stuff, it doesn't look good for them. I will also say that Ted Cruz being in Texas and handing out blankets doesn't actually do anything. And I really hate performative politics as just a general rule. Nonetheless, the media are going hard after Ted Cruz. I'm sure we'll be talking about that tomorrow. Plus, apparently, President Biden now says that he is open to racial reparations. I mean, it sounds like unity to me, guys. Unity in which people of one race pay money to people of another race based on race sounds like an amazing, amazing move toward American unity. We'll get to all of that tomorrow. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
I actually feel blessed to have been able to do my lifelong dream. I mean, I wanted to be on the radio from age 8.
Rush Limbaugh was the greatest.
The views expressed by the host on this show are not necessarily those of the staff, management, nor sponsors of this station, but they ought to be.
I know that our audience knows Rush. Even if you don't know Rush, you know Rush through me, because the fact is that so much of my worldview growing up was shaped by Rush, just like pretty much every other conservative of my generation. I grew up driving back and forth to school in a 1986 Honda Civic with no air conditioning, and Rush Limbaugh on 640 a.m.
I spent most of the 90s overseas. I was an expatriate in England, and when I came back, to my surprise, I found that my politics had changed, and I didn't really know they had changed, and part of finding out they had changed was listening to Rush Limbaugh.
One of the most important aspects of this program, other than my presence, of course, that being topic selection. Over to you.
He was a man of consequence, and no matter how you feel about his politics, you should be able to respect that at least, to be a true original, which he was. In a world of copycats, and he spawned a whole generation of copycats.
All of the conservative talk radio and really all of the conservative alternative media that came in the past 20 years or so, that is because of Rush Limbaugh.
Rush changed radio. People don't remember this, but radio was virtually a dead medium when he came in, and he reinvented it. And that taught me something. That taught me never complain about the situation you're in. If you don't like the game, change the game.
Rush Limbaugh executing everything I'm supposed to do and more flawlessly.
Rush was a formative figure in terms of informing me about conservative messages, conservative philosophy. Not just that, but Rush Limbaugh always, throughout his career, befuddled his critics. The reason for that, the reason he had a connection with his audience, not just because he spoke to them like a normal person, but also because Rush was hilarious and that he is clever and that he's funny. It's something that the left could never catch on to.
Talent on loan from God.
Rush Limbaugh with talent on loan from God. As usual, doing this program with half my brain tied behind my back. Better than that, give it to a liberal. Irritate them, annoy them, give them the Limbaugh letter.
And the fact is the left could never take that. The left always wanted conservatives to be Puritan and unfunny and grumpy, and Rush wasn't any of those things. We can all take a page from Rush Limbaugh.
You never heard Rush talking about fans or admirers of his. You heard him talking about the listener.
He spoke conservative philosophy in the language of the common man, right? He was speaking to people who hadn't read Edmund Burke. He was making sure that people understood the basic nature of limited government and God-given rights.
Let's make it as bad as it can be. Let's try to find some communists to put in and run things. You can find them. I mean, they're in journalism. You got them on college campuses.
He was saying to people who may have felt dispossessed by the elites in our society, people who sneered at them, looked down on them, and said they couldn't control their own life. He was talking to them.
Especially back when the media controlled the entire narrative. You didn't have the internet. The media controlled everything, except Rush Limbaugh.
He actually cared about and thought highly of his audience.
What makes this country great, folks, is you. You, individuals, going out and living your life independently. You striving and pursuing excellence, not fairness, not equality, not sameness, but trying to be the best you can be, investing in yourself.
Rush also is the best broadcaster I ever heard. My dad was a great broadcaster, and Rush, after him, was just as good as they come. I know good broadcasters when I hear them. I grew up with one, and Rush is the best.
Personally, as a conservative, I admire his consistent, lifelong defense of conservative ideas, conservative values. But it was more than that. It was more than just defending those ideas and those values. He helped to expose millions of Americans to them, educate millions of Americans.
He had a really deep, serious relationship with his listeners. And it's why Rush's listeners felt such a strong bond of loyalty and kinship to him. And I count myself among those listeners.
Not only have I been blessed to be able to do it, but I truly have been blessed by having people like you as the audience.
Humility is a rare commodity in media and politics, especially, generally speaking too, but especially in those two fields. And Rush Limbaugh had it in spades. And humility, of course, is the beginning of wisdom. And I think it had a lot to do with why he was able to spread his wisdom to so many people for so long.
Rush has been a big influence on me. He's created the job that I'm doing at the Daily Wire, and he's been a big and excellent influence on the country. He has done yeoman service.
The world would be a very different place, and a worse place, if Rush had never lived. And you can't say that about everybody, or even most people. He lived a consequential life.
There is a special providence in dying on Ash Wednesday. Rush Limbaugh had absolute perfect timing, the greatest showman for decades, right up until the very last moment.
Truly irreplaceable. Rest in peace to Rush Limbaugh, a true legend.
So, a giant thank you to Rush. I only had the opportunity to meet Rush a couple of times. It was an amazing honor. It was a pleasure every time. History is going to remember Rush as a formative influence on the movement to conserve founding principles of the United States. So from me, from my audience, thank you to Rush Limbaugh.
Rush, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.